My aunt tried to frame my mother for the horrible thing. Her stepson did, sending her to prison. I don't even know how to start this. My hands are shaking so bad I can barely type, but I need to get this out. I need an outside perspective, because I feel like I'm going crazy and my entire world has been built on a lie. This is about my family. Specifically, my mother, my Aunt Lucia, and her golden boy stepson, Sergio. We all live in Madrid, in one of those old beautiful buildings where most of the apartments are owned by a single extended family. My grandparents bought it decades ago, and now it's filled with their kids and grandkids. It's supposed to be our fortress, this tight-knit community where you can borrow a cup of sugar or leave your door unlocked. But it's not. It's a fishbowl. Every argument is heard through the thin walls. Every secret whispered in the shared courtyard becomes public knowledge by dinner. There are no secrets here. Or so I thought. The queen of this little kingdom is my Aunt Lucia. She's not the oldest, but she acts like she is. She's the self-appointed matriarch, and her entire existence revolves around maintaining the family's public image. Her favorite phrase is La familia es lo primero. Family first. But what she means is her version of the family comes first. A perfect, respectable, flawless version that doesn't actually exist. She's the one who organizes the holiday dinners, dictates who sits where, and tells you if your dress is appropriate. She smooths over every conflict, not by resolving it, but by burying it under a mountain of fake smiles and passive-aggressive comments. My mother is the complete opposite. She's the quiet heart of our family, an artist who finds her peace in her sewing room. That room is her sanctuary. It smells like warm fabric and machine oil, and the walls are covered in colorful spools of thread and half-finished projects. It's the only place in the entire building that feels truly calm, a place where Lucia's loud, overbearing energy can't seem to penetrate. My mom is gentle and kind, and because of that, she's always been overshadowed by her sister's booming personality. She just lets Lucia take the lead for the sake of peace. And then there's Sergio, Lucia's stepson, her pride and joy. From the moment she married his father, Sergio became her project. To the outside world, he's perfect. Handsome, charming, always ready with a compliment. But we all knew the truth. He was trouble. Nothing major at first. Just a constant string of misunderstandings, a broken window from a stray football, a neighbor's car getting keyed after an argument over a parking space, loud, rowdy parties that went on until 4 a.m., and every single time Lucia would swoop in. It was never about discipline. It was damage control. She'd show up at the neighbor's door with a bottle of expensive wine and a story about how Sergio was just a passionate boy with a good heart. She'd pay for the damages, charm them into silence, and somehow twist the narrative until Sergio looked like the victim of a misunderstanding. We all just watched it happen. We bit our tongues and nodded along because rocking the boat meant facing Lucia's wrath, and no one wanted that. We chose the easy path, the path of silence. And now, I think that silence is what finally broke us. The cracks in the facade started showing years ago, but we all just learned to paint over them. I remember when Sergio was maybe 17, he got into a screaming match with Senor Mateo from 3B over a girl. It ended with Sergio shoving the guy down a half flight of stairs. It wasn't a huge fall, but Mateo sprained his wrist and was furious. Before anyone could even process what happened, Lucia was there. I watched from our doorway as she put a hand on Mateo's arm, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She talked about Sergio's passion and his protective instincts, and by the end of the conversation, she had somehow convinced Mateo that he had been the one to escalate things by raising his voice to a boy. She paid for his medical bill and sent over a jamon iberico so big it barely fit in his kitchen. The next week, everyone was talking about how generous Lucia was, not about how her stepson had assaulted a neighbor. That was her magic trick, making the problem disappear and somehow coming out of it looking like a saint. But there was always a cost, and it felt like my mother was the one who secretly paid it. I think Lucia has always been jealous of my mom. Not in a big, dramatic way, but in a quiet, simmering way that poisons everything. My mother has a genuine warmth that people are drawn to. Neighbors stop by her apartment for coffee and a real chat, not just to complain or ask for a favor. They bring her cuttings from their plants for her windowsill garden. Lucia sees that, and it eats at her. She commands respect through fear and obligation. My mom earns it with simple kindness. I remember one afternoon, our neighbor Carmen brought my mom a small cake, just as a thank you for hemming her granddaughter's communion dress. Lucia saw the exchange from her balcony. Later, I heard her say to my mom in the hallway, her voice sharp and low, "It must be nice to have so much free time for your little hobbies, Elena. Some of us have real family matters to manage." My mom just looked down at her hands and didn't say anything. She never did. She just retreated back into her sewing room, the only place Lucia's bitterness couldn't reach. The tension really started to boil over these last few months. Sergio's parties became a weekly thing. The bass would thump through the floorboards until sunrise. The stairwell would reek of stale beer and cigarettes in the morning, and we'd find strangers passed out on the landing. Everyone was getting fed up, especially Senor Morales, the elderly widower who lives directly below Sergio. He was frail and had a heart condition, and the noise was literally making him sick. He complained, first politely, then desperately. My mom, being who she is, tried to help. She'd bake him cookies and sit with him just to let him vent. Then she tried to talk to Lucia, gently. "Lucia, please," I heard her say one evening, her voice barely a whisper in the courtyard. "Senor Morales is suffering. Can you just ask Sergio to turn the music down after midnight?" I will never forget the look on Lucia's face. It was pure venom. She squared her shoulders and looked down at my mom, even though they're the same height. "You stay out of this," she hissed. "You're only making it worse, stirring the pot. You think you're so much better than us with your quiet little life, judging everyone." She was already twisting it, turning my mom's compassion into an attack. She was laying the groundwork, painting my mother as the building's busybody, the one obsessed with Sergio's noise. It was a warning. But we didn't see it. We just thought it was Lucia being Lucia. We had no idea it was the prelude to a war. The night it happened, the noise was unreal. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a physical presence. The bass vibrated up through the floor, a deep, angry thrum that made the glasses in our kitchen cabinet tremble. My mom and I just sat in our living room, not even trying to talk over it. Around 2 a.m., the music was cut short by shouting. Loud, furious voices from the courtyard, then a sickening, wet thud, followed by a woman's scream. Then, silence. An absolute, deafening silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise. We looked at each other, my heart pounding in my chest, but we didn't go out. You learn not to get involved. You learn to just lock your door and wait for Lucia to clean it up in the morning. But she didn't clean this up. The next morning, there was a knock. Not a neighborly tap, but a hard, official banging that rattled the whole door frame. I opened it to 2 policemen in uniform. They weren't looking at me. Their eyes were fixed on my mother, who was standing behind me in her housecoat, holding a cup of tea. "Elena Garcia?" one of them asked, and my blood ran cold. They said there had been an incident, an assault. Senor Morales was in the hospital with a broken hip and a concussion. They said they had reason to believe the person responsible had been in our apartment. It made no sense. My mother, bless her, was just confused. She invited them in, thinking it was some kind of mistake they could clear up. "Of course, officers," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Whatever you need." They walked past our living room, past the kitchen, and went straight for my mother's sewing room. My stomach twisted. How did they know about her room? It was her private space, her sanctuary. Watching them, 2 large men in stiff, dark uniforms, move through that delicate, creative space felt like a desecration. They touched her patterns, pushed aside bolts of silk, their big hands clumsy and invasive. And then one of them picked up her old wicker sewing basket. He rummaged through it for a moment, pushing aside spools of thread and packets of needles. Then he stopped. He pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside it was a tiny silver charm, a little bull with garnet eyes. He held it up. "Can you identify this, ma'am?" My mother just stared at it, her face a mask of bewilderment. "No," she whispered. "I've never seen that before in my life." "Our victim, Senor Morales, identified the charm," the other officer said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was ripped from his attacker's bracelet during the struggle. An anonymous source suggested we might find it here. They said you had a history of confrontations with Senor Morales' upstairs neighbor and had made threats. And just like that, everything clicked into place. Lucia's venomous words in the courtyard, the way she'd been whispering with other neighbors, her face a mask of grave concern. She hadn't just been gossiping. She had been building a case. She'd twisted my mother's quiet desperation over the noise into a narrative of a bitter, unstable woman. A woman so consumed with jealousy and rage that she'd orchestrate an attack on an old man just to get back at her nephew. My aunt, my own blood, had painted a target on my mother's back. It was the most surreal moment of my life. I watched as they asked my mother to turn around. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping around her delicate wrists echoed in the small room. My mother didn't cry. She didn't protest. She was just gone. Her eyes were glassy, her body went limp, as if her soul had just left and only a shell remained. She looked so small, so fragile, being led out of her own home like a common criminal. As they walked her down the hallway, I saw the other doors creak open. Eyes peered out from the shadows of doorways, the same neighbors who drank coffee in my mother's kitchen, the same people whose children she'd knitted sweaters for. They weren't looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with fear, with suspicion, with judgment. The whispers had already done their work. Across the courtyard, standing on her balcony and watching the whole scene unfold, was my Aunt Lucia. She had a hand over her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock, but I saw her eyes. There was no horror in them. There was only the cold, flat satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. I just stood there in the empty doorway for don't know how long, listening to the siren fade into the Madrid traffic. The door to our apartment was still wide open, and the scent of my mother's morning tea hung in the air, a ghost of the life we had 5 minutes ago. My body felt like it was filled with lead. Every limb was heavy, and a deep humming paralysis had taken root in my bones. I could feel the eyes of my family, of our neighbors, burning into me from their own doorways and windows. The whispers had already started. I could almost hear them slithering through the courtyard, a venomous hiss of gossip and morbid excitement. Did you see her face? Always so quiet, the quiet ones are always the craziest. I knew something was off with her. Shame washed over me in a hot, suffocating wave. It was so intense I thought I was going to be sick right there on the welcome mat. It wasn't my shame. It belonged to them, to Lucia. But it was clinging to me, seeping into my skin. I was no longer Alba. I was the daughter of the monster, from 3A. I finally managed to close the door, the click of the lock sounding like a gunshot in the sudden silence. I leaned against it, my whole body trembling. What was I supposed to do? Call a lawyer? Scream? I felt like a child, completely powerless. My first instinct was to run to Lucia, to beg her, to ask her how this could have happened, still clinging to some stupid, childish belief that she, the matriarch, could fix this. But the image of her face on the balcony, that cold, triumphant stillness, stopped me dead. I couldn't breathe in the apartment. It felt tainted. I slipped out and went to the stairwell, the cool, stale air a small relief. I just needed a moment of quiet, a place where I didn't feel 100 pairs of eyes on me. I sank down on the cold marble steps, my head in my hands, trying to piece together the nightmare. The echoey silence of the stairwell was usually a comfort, but then I heard voices floating up from the landing below. Lucia's voice, low and urgent, and Sergio's, thick with arrogance. "You don't say anything more than what we discussed," Lucia was commanding, her voice a sharp whisper that cut through the air. "You were asleep. You heard nothing. You were exhausted from studying. Got it?" Yeah, I got it," Sergio mumbled, sounding bored. "But what if they ask about—" "They won't," she cut him off. "I've already given them the story. Your Aunt Elena was obsessed, unhinged. She couldn't stand seeing you happy. It's a clean narrative. You just have to keep your mouth shut and play the part of the shocked, concerned nephew. Let me handle the rest." My heart stopped. She wasn't consoling him. She wasn't even worried. She was coaching him, drilling him. This was a script, and they were rehearsing. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wrought iron banister, the cold metal biting into my skin. I needed to hear it all. Then it came. The sound that shattered everything. Sergio let out a short, ugly laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a sound of pure, nasty dismissal. Whatever, he scoffed, and his next words will be burned into my brain for the rest of my life. La tia Elena needed a lesson anyway, always sticking her nose where it didn't belong. A lesson. He thought my mother, the kindest, gentlest soul I have ever known, deserved to be handcuffed and dragged from her home like an animal. He thought this was a lesson. In that instant, something inside me snapped. The grief, the shame, the helpless, terror. It all burned away, incinerated by a sudden white-hot rage that was so pure and so cold it felt like ice in my veins. The shaking stopped. The nausea vanished. My hands, which had been trembling uncontrollably, became perfectly still. I looked down at them, clenching them into fists, and they felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who was done being silent. I realized then that I couldn't appeal to their decency, to their love, to the family-first bullshit they preached. You can't appeal to something that doesn't exist. They were rotten to the core. The fear was gone, replaced by a terrifying crystal-clear purpose. Lucia had built her perfect world on a foundation of lies, using my mother as a sacrifice to protect her precious stepson. Fine. I would just have to burn that world to the ground, and I would use her own perfect narrative as the kindling. I spent the first few hours moving on pure, uncut adrenaline. The rage I felt in the stairwell had sharpened into a weapon, and I was ready to use it. I knew I couldn't go head-to-head with Lucia. She controlled the people, but she didn't control their phones. Our building's WhatsApp group, Vecinos de Velázquez 7, became my primary crime scene. I scrolled back for what felt like an eternity, my thumb aching, past the usual complaints about dog poop and loud television. Then I got to the night of the party. It was a goldmine. Dozens of angry texts. This is insane. It's 1 a.m. I'm calling the police if this doesn't stop. But the real evidence was in the audio notes. People too furious to type had just ranted into their phones. I found one from Senora Alvarez from the 4th floor, her voice trembling with rage, the thumping bass of Sergio's music so loud in the background it was practically a duet. He's going to give someone a heart attack. Someone has to do something. I downloaded every single one, saving them to a folder on my laptop I labeled ammunition. Next, I needed visuals. I started sending DMs to the younger neighbors, the ones I knew lived on their phones. My message was quiet, desperate. Hey, I know last night was horrible. They took my mom. If you happen to take any video of the shouting from your window, please send it to me. I swear I'll keep you out of it. For about 24 hours, I thought it was going to work. A few people responded. Carla from 2B sent me a grainy 15-second clip. You couldn't see much, but you could clearly hear Sergio's voice slurred and ugly, yelling, "Get away from me, you old bastard!" It was proof he was in a confrontation. My heart leaped. It felt like the first real crack in Lucia's story. And then the walls started closing in. Lucia sent in her cleaner, my Uncle Mateo. He's her older brother, a retired cop who still walks around with the same swagger and intimidation he had when he wore a badge. He's the family's enforcer. I saw him from our living room window, making his rounds. He wasn't yelling or threatening. He was worse. He was calm, leaning against people's door frames, talking in a low, reasonable-sounding voice. He was dropping casual reminders of who he was, who he knew down at the local precinct. He was reminding them that getting involved in a family dispute was a messy, complicated business. He was delivering a threat wrapped in a friendly warning. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. People who had promised to look for videos suddenly stopped answering my texts. My messages to Carla were being delivered, but she wasn't opening them. I was being ghosted by an entire building. I cornered another neighbor, Pablo, by the mailboxes. The day before, he'd been furious. telling me he'd be happy to give a statement. Now he wouldn't even make eye contact. He just mumbled something about not wanting any trouble and practically ran up the stairs. I was locked out. They had circled the wagons, not to protect the family, but to protect the lie. Lucia's influence, backed by Mateo's intimidation, was an impenetrable fortress. The building, my lifelong home, suddenly felt like enemy territory. Every silent doorway felt like an accusation. I finally got the weekly scheduled call from my mom. I'd been rehearsing what to say, how to sound strong and confident, but the moment I heard her voice, all of it crumbled. She sounded like a dried leaf, like the slightest pressure would make her disintegrate. "How are you, Mama?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'm okay, mi vida," she lied, and the lie was so thin it was transparent. I told her I was working on things, that I was gathering evidence, trying to inject a hope into my voice that I no longer felt. There was a long, heavy silence on the line, filled with the static of the prison phone. Then she whispered, "Alba, stop." "What? No, I'm not stopping." "Please," she begged, and her voice broke. "You can't win against them. Lucia, she will ruin you too. Don't let her. Just let this go. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Hearing her say that, hearing her surrender, was like a physical blow. It knocked the air out of my lungs. I hung up the phone and just sat there in the dark, the silence of our apartment pressing in on me. My rage was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy despair. My mother was giving up. My neighbors were terrified into silence. My family had branded me a traitor. For the first time, I felt a sliver of doubt. Was she right? Was I just a stupid girl trying to punch a brick wall, destroying what was left of our lives for a fight I had already lost? That phone call broke me. After I hung up, I just sat on the floor of my mom's sewing room, surrounded by her things, and for the first time, I let myself truly believe that I had lost. My own mother, the person I was doing all this for, was begging me to stop. The fight had gone out of her, and listening to her voice, so thin and brittle, I felt it drain out of me too. Was I just being selfish? Was this whole quest for justice just my own arrogant way of dealing with my anger, while my mom paid the price for it in a cell? The thought was nauseating. The family first mantra, the one Lucia had twisted into a weapon, echoed in my head. Maybe this was what it really meant. Maybe it meant swallowing the poison to keep the family from falling apart. Maybe I was the one destroying everything. For a full day, I did nothing. I didn't make any calls. I didn't check the WhatsApp group. I just existed, in the apartment, feeling like a ghost in my own life. But every time I walked past her sewing basket, the one the police had violated, I saw it. The empty space where a lie had been planted. I couldn't let that be the end of the story. I couldn't let my mother's surrender be the final word. So I made a decision. I was done with people. I couldn't rely on witnesses who could be scared into silence. I had one thing left. One tiny, stupid piece of the puzzle that Mateo couldn't intimidate. The charm itself. The little silver bull with garnet eyes. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane idea. But it was the only one I had left. I started a list. Every small jewelry store, every boutique, every artisan market I could find online in the entire community of Madrid. I spent days on the phone, my voice growing hoarse. The conversations were all the same. "Hi, I'm looking for information on a very specific bracelet charm." Most of the time, I got a polite but firm, "Sorry, can't help you." Sometimes it was a bored, "We don't do custom pieces." A few times, they just hung up on me. Each no was another small death. I'd cross a name off my list, the feeling of hopelessness growing heavier in my gut. I started to feel crazy, like I was chasing a phantom. The city felt impossibly huge, the task monumentally stupid. I was at the end of my list, on day 4 of this miserable, soul-crushing quest. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen, and I had a tension headache that felt like a metal band tightening around my skull. I had one name left. A tiny, chic-looking boutique called Elia's Trove, tucked away in the Malasaña district. I almost didn't call. What was the point? but I dialed the number anyway, expecting the same dismissal. A woman with a warm, slightly husky voice answered. I gave her my now memorized speech. Hi, sorry to bother you. I'm trying to track down a specific piece of jewelry. It's a small silver charm, a bull, with tiny garnet eyes. I was waiting for the click of the hang-up, but instead there was a pause. A bull with garnet eyes? She repeated, and there was something in her tone, a flicker of recognition. Yes, I know that charm. It's from a local designer. We're one of the only shops that carries her work. It's quite distinctive. My heart, which had been a dead weight in my chest, gave a single painful thud. I could barely breathe. You do? I stammered. Did you happen to sell one recently, in the last week or two? Let me think, she said. I could hear the faint sound of clicking keys. Yes, actually. A woman came in and bought one just last week. She was very particular about it. My hand was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. The woman who bought it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Can you describe her? Was she maybe in her late 50s, very well-dressed, dark hair? There was another pause, this one longer, more cautious. Why are you asking all this? She asked, her warm tone gone, replaced by a professional chill. This was it, my one shot. My name is Alba Garcia. My mother, Elena Garcia, was arrested for an assault she didn't commit. The police planted a piece of evidence in her home, that exact charm. The woman I described is my aunt, Lucia Morales. I think she's the one who bought it. The silence on the other end of the line was so absolute I thought she'd hung up. Then the woman's voice came back, but it was completely different. It was low and sharp and full of a sudden, intense focus. Lucia Morales, she said, saying the name like it was poison on her tongue. Tell me your name again. Alba Garcia. My mother is Elena. She let out a short, sharp breath that was half laugh, half gasp. My God. Elena's daughter, I'm Sophia. Your mother and I were friends, a long, long time ago. Before Lucia. She trailed off. Lucia and I haven't spoken in 15 years. Not after she ruined my engagement for sport. Of course she did this. This has her stench. All over it. I felt the world tilt on its axis. It wasn't just luck. It was fate. It was a 15-year-old grudge just sitting there, waiting for a spark. Sophia, I whispered, tears starting to well up in my eyes. I need proof. You're going to get it, she said, her voice now filled with a cold, hard resolve that mirrored my own. She bought the charm 2 days after the attack. I remember it clearly because she was so smug, acting like she was doing me a favor by gracing my store with her presents. And the best part? She paid with a credit card, and for the receipt she had me make it out to Sergio's name. Said it was a future gift for him, the arrogant fool. I choked back a sob. It was more perfect than I could have ever imagined. I have the digital receipt with the timestamp, Sophia continued, her voice a rapid-fire staccato of vengeance. And I have security footage of her standing right at my counter, clear as day, holding that little silver bowl in her hand. I'll send it, all to you on one condition. My shop's name stays out of the papers. I'll testify if I have to, but I don't want my business dragged through the mud with her. Of course, I said, my voice thick with relief. Anything. When I hung up the phone, the despair was gone. The doubt was gone. Everything that had been weighing me down for days had evaporated, burned away by the truth. I looked at my hands. They were steady again. All the fear, all the hesitation, was replaced by a single chilling thought that settled over me like a shroud of ice. I have her. Sergio's pretrial hearing was exactly the circus Lucia had orchestrated. She was there, of course, looking impeccable in a navy blue suit, her face a perfect mask of maternal grief and steely resolve. She held Sergio's hand, rubbing soothing circles on his knuckles while he played the part of the traumatized victim, his eyes downcast. My family filled the first 2 rows, a silent, grim-faced jury already convinced of my mother's guilt. They wouldn't even look at me. I was the pariah, the daughter of the crazy woman who had brought shame on them all. They had no idea I was about to set their entire world on fire. I didn't wait to be called. I didn't wait for my mother's public defender to weakly object. While Lucia's lawyer was droning on about Sergio's spotless character, I walked to the front of the courtroom, my laptop in my hand. The judge, a stern-looking woman with tired eyes, looked up, annoyed. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "I'm Alba Garcia, Elena Garcia's daughter," I said, my voice coming out clearer and colder than I expected. "And I have evidence that proves her innocence and identifies the real perpetrators of this crime." Before anyone could stop me, I had connected my laptop to the courtroom's projector. The first thing that flashed onto the large screen was the security footage from Sophia's boutique. It was crystal clear. There was my Aunt Lucia standing at the counter, her face a mask of condescending charm. And there, in her perfectly manicured hand, was the little silver bowl. The timestamp was visible in the corner, 2 days after the assault. A collective gasp went through the gallery. I saw Lucia's face go rigid, the first tiny crack appearing in her perfect facade. I didn't give her a chance to recover. "Next," I announced and clicked to file. The sound of Lucia's own voice filled the silent courtroom, amplified by the speakers. "You just have to keep your mouth shut and play the part of the shocked, concerned nephew." Then came Sergio's bored reply, and finally, his ugly, dismissive laugh. La tia Elena needed a lesson anyway. The sound of that laugh, echoing in the sterile courtroom, was 100 times more damning than it had been in the stairwell. I saw my Uncle Mateo flinch. Other family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their certainty beginning to crumble. Then, the final blow. I had gotten a message the night before from a younger cousin, one who had always been a bit scared of Lucia. "I can't testify," she'd written, "but I think you should see this." I pulled up the screenshot of the text message Lucia had sent to Sergio the morning of my mother's arrest. It was projected 10 feet high for the whole room to see. 5 simple words that sealed her fate. "I've put the piece where they'll find it." The room was utterly silent. I turned off the projector and faced my aunt. Her mask was gone. Her face was a mottled mess of shock and pure, undiluted hatred. Her eyes were boring into me, promising 1,000 different kinds of hell. I didn't care. I looked right at her, my voice low but carrying in the stillness. "Is this what family first looks like, Tia?" It all happened very fast after that. The judge's face was like thunder. She slammed her gavel down and the sound cracked through the tension. She immediately ordered my mother's release, citing a gross and malicious miscarriage of justice, and launched a full investigation into Lucia Morales and Sergio Ramos for assault, perjury, and conspiracy to frame an innocent person. I watched, my body numb, as 2 bailiffs approached them. The same metallic click of handcuffs that had haunted my nightmares echoed through the room, but this time they were snapping around Lucia's and Sergio's wrists. The matriarch and her golden boy, stripped of their power, were led away. They didn't even look at me. My mother is home now. She sits in her sewing room for hours, but she doesn't sew. She just holds a piece of fabric in her hands, staring at nothing. She's free, but a part of her is still locked away in that cell. The building is a different kind of prison now. The whispers are gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. When I pass neighbors in the hall, they don't look away in shame or suspicion anymore. They just stare, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. I am no longer the daughter of the monster. I am the monster who devoured the other monsters. Last night, I was dusting in the living room and knocked over the big, silver-framed photo from last Christmas. The whole extended family posed on the steps of our building, Lucia in the center, beaming. The glass shattered, and a long, jagged crack split the photo right down the middle, separating my mother and me from everyone else. I just left it there. It felt right. Family first shouldn't mean protecting the rot at the expense of the healthy branches. It shouldn't mean sacrificing the good to appease the evil. I know I did what I had to do to save my mother, but I didn't just expose a liar. I detonated a bomb in the heart of my own family, and the shrapnel hit everyone. I destroyed my aunt's life and tore my family apart to prove my mother's innocence. Was there any other way, or Eita for choosing this path of total destruction to get to the truth?